So, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us at the Excelist team. Today we have with us Paul. He will introduce himself in a few minutes and explain what he's going to teach us. So, Paul, we really appreciate you joining us and taking your time to be with us and teach us new things. And I really appreciate everyone joining us. And the stage is yours, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm grateful for Israel for inviting me and appreciate you for the introduction there. So yeah, my name is Paul Barnhurst, and I wish I could speak your guys' language, but unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to me in English. So my name is, like I said, Paul Barnhurst. My business is called the FP&A Guy. It's kind of a nickname. About 6-7 years ago, I used it as a hashtag on LinkedIn and it ended up sticking. And so I named it my business. I talk a lot about FP&A, or as some people would know it, financial planning and analysis, corporate budgeting and forecasting. So with that, I do a lot around Excel. I do several podcasts, one about financial modeling, one about AI and technology, and one about FP&A. I do Excel training and several other types of training as well. And so that's a little bit about me. What I want to talk about, I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I've been that for about 2 years now, and that's been a real privilege to get to work with and get to know some of the true global experts in FP, or not in FP&A, in Excel. I really look up to a lot of them. So what I wanted to do today, and first, as I'm going through this, feel free to ask questions throughout. Put any of your questions in chat. If you need to come off mute and ask a question, please do. What I wanted to talk about is data visualization. And we're going to walk through an Excel file that I'll share here in a minute. In fact, I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat now, just so everybody can have access to it. And we're going to open it here in about 15 minutes. But before I do that, what I wanted to go through is some of the principles that I've found really helpful with building graphs. Anyone who works in Excel at some point has probably had to build a graph or a chart. The great news is, I expect in the future AI to get better and better at helping us make those choices. It can already do a pretty good job in Excel, but we're going to talk more about some principles, and then we're just going to do some of my favorite tips and tricks that I think help with data visualization. All right. So I'm going to jump in and just share a few things. I really love this quote about data visualization. It says, data visualization is the language of decision making. Good charts effectively convey information. And this last part is what I love. Great charts enable, inform, and improve decision making. And if you've ever been in a meeting and someone puts up a chart and you're looking at it, squinting at it, going, what in the world are they talking about? You know what I'm talking about, how much of a difference it can make. Versus the time when you look at it and go, oh, wow, we need to do something. Like it becomes apparently obvious from an image that there's a problem. You know that's a good visual when you immediately are able to take something away. And so what are some of the things you can do for that? So for me, I want to share an example of the power of visualization. If I put something like this up on the screen, just a ton of numbers, and I asked you what number is most important, I'm going to guess I would get a bunch of different answers, right? If I say, hey, what's the takeaway from this chart? If I asked you that, everybody probably looks at it and goes, I don't know, maybe the fact that something's missing in week 6. After spending a little bit of time with it, maybe go, well, week 11's the highest. But you can't look at this and get a takeaway, right? If I asked you what's the takeaway, if one of you know what it is, please let me know. I've never been able to look at it and come up with a quick kind of takeaway or key message from it. Now, contrast that with this. And you're going to notice here I use an orange and blue. And I'm just going to explain why I used that instead of a red and green. The reason I did that here is I was making this colorblind friendly. So if you see a kind of some colors that you're like, why is he using blue and orange? The blue is representing the green. The orange is representing the red in a colorblind colorblind friendly. It's a color palette that some data viz software use. So something I've started to try to adopt, because you never know when you're going to run into somebody that doesn't see red and green the way the rest of us do. So if I gave this chart to you and I asked the same question, what jumps out? Here's the type of things I'll typically hear pretty immediately. Well, the target's 575,000. What happened in week 6? Or what happened in week 11? Or why do we have so much variability, right? 3 weeks below, 2 weeks above, week below, 3 above, below, below. There's no consistency. So something jumps out to you. Now we can start to have a conversation, because you can look at the data and things jump out. Now we have our conversation. We realize, hey, there was a problem in week 6. We probably did something right in week 11. And you can start asking, what is it or why? Then I bring back something like this. Same data as the first time, right? All we've done is a couple simple things. We've put in a target for each of the locations. We've put in kind of, the target for all 3 together. And then we've put in a heat map, red, which I could have made these blue and orange. In this case, I did leave a red-green just because that's the default in Excel on this one. And we can see there's a problem with week 1. Or not week 1, with Work Center A. It's consistently underperforming while the others are doing better. Now we can have a conversation. Okay, so what's different about Work Center A? Where if I start with this, it's really hard to have a conversation. This makes it much easier. So those are just some simple examples. There are several of the power of visuals. Now I'm just going to walk through a few principles that I like. So I'm going to put these all up on the screen, and we're going to touch on each of them individually. So I always say, know your audience, design for your audience. Know your data. Focus on the message you're trying to deliver, not the data. You'll hear some people say the data speaks for itself. We shouldn't try to interpret it. The reality is that's not really true. We give data a voice. You can take whatever you want out of data. Just putting data on the screen does not tell the story. We have to do that, and that involves interpretation. So we need to give a message. I'm a big believer in the keep it simple principle. Ruthlessly reduce clutter. Color. We'll talk about contrast, labeling, choose the right chart, and context. So I'm going to run through each of these, just about a minute each, and then we'll get into Excel and some of my favorite tips for data visualization. So what I always like to say to people is, know and design for your audience. If you're presenting to the CEO, you're probably going to present different than if you're presenting to your boss or you're presenting to a customer support team. So on the screen, and I'll send this PDF to Israel, so I'll send a PDF version of this, you have a copy of it, are some of the type of questions we should be asking. Some leaders will have a certain design preference. An example I often give, and you can put it in the chat, what do you prefer? This pie chart or the bar chart on the right? Love to know, just throw in the chat, if I'm presenting, which one's easier for you? What do you prefer, the pie chart or the bar chart? The reality is most people are going to prefer the bar chart. But I had a boss that he wanted everything in a pie chart. That's knowing your audience, right? If you know your audience has a preference, then you're going to want to present that way. Next comes know your data. And I like to think of it in 3 buckets. Know the structure of your data. What type of data do you have? Is it numbers? Is it written? What are the metrics? What information do I have about it? Then there's the quality. Is the data accurate? As I always like to say, kind of joke I have, all data is messy. Some data is useful. So how useful is the data? How good is the quality? Where did it come from? How was it collected? Do I have outliers? And then always knowing if you can access the data or not is good. Who has access to it? What tools are needed? How long will it take to get the data? So know your data. And then number 3, as you're building your messaging, focus on message first design versus data first. And I'm just going to share one of these examples. So here's the data first example. Here's our quarterly revenue data by region. If you have region on the map and you have cells on the map, they're going to know that. Your message didn't tell them anything they can't tell from a good visual. If the visual says, east, west, north, south, or, Europe, US, whatever your regions are, if it says those, and then it has a sales number, it's going to be pretty obvious what it is. So something like this tells maybe the message I want to get across. APAC, or the Asia revenue, grew 40%, outpacing all other regions by 3x. Now there's a message there. I can start to have a conversation. What made Asia different? Versus, okay, you just told me what I'm looking at. Now I got to figure out what's the message. So as much as you can, give the message in the titles, in the call outs, make it clear. The message, what's the number one thing you want your audience to remember? That's the question you want to ask. Number 4, keep it simple. Here's the example I give. This donut chart. If I ask someone to interpret it, it gets really hard. Okay, yes, I can see yellow is Daniel, and Daniel had this looks like a really good Q3, but is that because he did well, or is that because somebody else did really poorly? And that's really hard to tell here. And, if I look at Emily, same type of thing. This is very complex. Here, it's really straightforward. I can see, okay, here's how each person did for each quarter. Here's the average. Here's the total. I could even do more color coding. But sometimes a simple table may be the best for your message. And so that's an example of what I mean by simple. Here are some of the questions I ask myself. For most graphs, not every, sometimes you might have a really complex graph. But for most graphs or visuals, can the audience or can someone understand it in less than 3 seconds? If they can't, you might want to think, can I simplify? What can I remove without losing the message? That's kind of the point I take. Is I finish the first and I look at it and go, okay, if I take away some of these data labels, if I take away the grid lines, or maybe if I group some of the data differently, does it lose the message I'm trying to give? If the answer is no, you probably want to take it out, because the less you give people, generally the better. They just need enough to get the message. And then the last question I always ask myself, is it more complex than it needs to be? Is there a way I can streamline it? So that's kind of my simplicity test. That's number 4. Next one, I'm a big fan of ruthlessly reducing clutter. I remember early in my career, I thought 3D charts were cool and lots of color. Now I look back and I think I had to make poor people look at those things because they're horrible. My advice as a general rule, don't use 3D charts. They don't work well. But when it comes to clutter, things like grid lines, you have to ask yourself, are they needed? Are these data labels needed, or could I just put data labels here? Borders. Does this border, it stands out, but does it actually aid in answering a question? I would argue, no, not really. 3D effects. As a general rule, they're nothing more than clutter. And what I'll call excessive use of color, particularly when there's no point behind the color. So I like to say use color sparingly and efficiently. And I'll share an example. We'll see some more examples of this. So my view is chart junk is a term that I think it was Stephen Few, one of the fathers, it might have been Edward Tufte. I think it was Edward Tufte that came up with the idea. He said, chart junk is visual elements that don't convey data or support understanding. They add noise, not signal. All right. So if I asked everybody in the room, what's the first color you see? Maybe I'll ask Leon, what's the first color you see here? What jumped out to you? What color?
The purple.
The purple. If I ask somebody else, do you think I might get a different answer?
Sure.
The red.
Red color.
See, there we go. Everybody looks at something differently. This is how you don't want to do color. Now, if I ask you the same question, what jumps out now?
Of course, the red one.
Right, the red. Maybe to some people also notice the blue, but your eyes immediately, almost everybody goes to the red. That's color with a purpose. This is coloring for the sake of coloring, which can be fun, but is not what we want to do with our data visuals. All right. Next is contrast. I think there's 4 different ways we can contrast. Size, right? If we make something larger, we're going to notice. Or if we have everything large and one thing really small, but a big change in size. Color, right? This purple is going to stand out against all of this. So color, weight. If we make something really bold or if we make it really light, both of those can stand out depending on what everything else looks like. And the last one is position. If I put something in a totally different spot than everything else, like an outlier, it's going to stand out. But is that the message you want to give? So it's really important to use contrast effectively. And here, there's a test they call the squint test. Kind of squint at your visualization. The most important element should still stand out. So that thing you're trying to emphasize, even if you squint, you should still be able to see it. If everything's blurry together, you probably need to contrast something. You need to call something out. Here's my next test. And we'll pick on Laurent one more time. Can you tell me how many 8s there are? Anyone else can guess as well. You can put your number in the chat. We can see if someone can beat her. How many 8s appear in this graph? 25. I think someone guessed. I don't think there's quite 25. That's the highest number I've had, but we'll see here in a minute. Maybe 8s and 9s together. 9, 10, right? So was that easy for anyone or was that painful? I think it's kind of painful. Now, how about if I ask you now? Pretty easy, right? It becomes much easier to see. We didn't have a right answer. It's 9.
I thought you were including the 8 in the header. It's like
I was
riddles.
wondering where the 10th came from. That makes sense. But it took you, this one's a lot quicker, right? You can see the difference.
Sure.
Now look at that.
Even better.
I brought color and contrast together. Exact same numbers. I didn't change anything in the underlying data. All I did is change the visual presentation. Another one I'm a big fan of, label directly and clearly. What labeling is easier? This down here for 2023, 24, 25, or something like this where it's actually right on the line. So wherever possible, try to directly label. It'll make it much easier for your audience. Better yet, some people like to do this. I thought these colors were close enough it's not needed, but you'll see some that you make the color of the label the exact same as the color of the line. If you had more color here, if they weren't all kind of, just a monochrome gray, I would probably consider doing that if you really want them to stand out. But that's my 8th principle. Legends generally aren't the best way because you have to look at it, you have to look down at the legend and back and make sure you got it right. 9, choose the right chart. There are several different guides out there for charts, and people try to say, hey, if you have this type of data, always use this type of chart. The reality is nearly any visual can have 5 or 6 different charts that can work. So start with the question you need to answer, not the chart type. The best chart type depends on what relationship in the data you want to highlight. If I want to show the parts to the whole, I might use a pie chart. But maybe I want to show, something about each one individually. I may not want a pie chart. I may use a bar chart. Or, if I want to show there's an outlier, I might use a scatter plot for something, where in another case, I might use a line chart. So I always encourage people to start with the question. And the last one is context matters. If I was to ask you, is the trend in this chart good or bad? Could you tell me?
It really depends what you want to tell your audience.
Exactly. I haven't given you any context, so you have no idea. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be unimportant. And we sometimes do that. We think, well, the data speaks for itself. I'll just throw it on the screen. It doesn't speak without context. So, some of the common context types we use, historical, versus last period, last year, right? So right here I have 2025. I show them 2024, 2023, and 2022. And now they can quickly tell there's a trend. Things are declining. But if I just gave you 2025 without any context, you wouldn't know that. Another example, targets versus budget versus forecast. Okay, I can see early in the year we outperformed it. At the end of the year, we're expecting to be under. Now I can have a conversation. Why this? Why that? Benchmarks. So here's me being silly. The FP&A guy's net promoter score exceeds industry average. Here's the industry average. Here's my competitors. And here's me at the top. I have some comparisons. And the last one is threshold, right? Sometimes you have a limit or a goal. If we've ever seen a gauge chart of, hey, we have a target of 100,000 and here's how we're performing. So just remember, your audience needs context and don't mislead them. Always be upfront. So those are my principles around data viz. Now what I want to do is, last slide, if anyone wants some really good books on data visualization, here's a few I recommend. My favorite are the ones on the left. I just finished this one called Practical Charts Sunday. Great book. I really like these other ones as well. So if you want a few good books on data visualization, those are there. All right, let's jump into Excel. After all, this is an Excel meetup. So enough time we spent on a PowerPoint. So someone asked, for trend, is it good to use the line chart? As a general rule, yes. Line charts can definitely show a trend. Is it the only way? No. You could use like a stacked area chart potentially. A scatter plot could show a trend, or depending on what you're trying to show, if you want to show correlation. But generally, I would say lines are the most common, and I think they're good for trends. Let me share one thing. I wasn't going to show this, but just since you asked that question, I will show one other thing. I just didn't want to spend too much time here. Let me pull something else up real quick from another deck I have. So generally, here's kind of how I think of selecting the right chart. I kind of break it into 5 groups. You have comparison. So actual variance versus budget or prior year. You're comparing one thing to another. You often have correlations or relationships. If you're trying to emphasize a correlation or relationship, there are certain graphs that generally work a little better for that. Parts to whole is another category we're often trying to show. Data over time or trends. So this is what you particularly asked about. And then distribution. And so here's kind of the way I think of it. Generally for comparisons, these are probably some of the charts. And word clouds are not something I use very often. Finance, waterfall is very common. You have column charts, bar charts. When you get into correlation, scatter plot is always a common one. Bubble charts can do that. Heat maps, which are just, as simple as just using Excel, could be an example of that. Parts to whole, pie charts, which I frankly am not a big fan of, but they do have their place. Tree maps, if anyone's ever done those, they're really easy to use in Excel. Gauge charts and stacked column charts are some of the most common when you're trying to show parts to the whole. Data over time, which gets into trends, line charts, stacked area charts, candlestick charts are some of the most common for that. And then distribution visuals, histograms and box plots. I don't get much into distribution, but those are some examples. All right. So now back to the file. If you guys can open the practice file, what I wanted to show is some Excel tricks and tips that I think will help in building visuals. So the first one I want to show is the benefit of using a table. And if you're using tables today, let me know. Go ahead and throw it in the chat if you're using them. I'd love to know. But what I have here is I have this data right here, and I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. And this one is connected to the table. This one is not connected to the table. Let's say I get 3 new months of data. So what I'm going to do, and you guys can do it as well, is I'm going to copy this data right here. I'm going to place it first down here and watch what happens. So I add my 3 months, right? Nothing happens to my chart. I would have to go to select data, add it. I use tables the most and let my user make the graphs. Yeah, you can definitely do that. It all depends on the purpose. What I find is, sometimes if you just need to give them the data and they're going to make a graph, that's fine. If you're presenting something, I find graphs are easier to bring people along. So there's pros and cons. But what I want to show here is a table in Excel. So this is a Microsoft table here. This is not. So if I copy these 3 months of data here, I have to manually update my chart. So this is my first tip, is why you should use tables when building charts if you're going to be updating them. So watch what happens here. If I paste that in, 3 things to notice. 1, the formatting automatically updated. These 2 columns, the formulas automatically carried over. And most importantly, my chart automatically updated to add the 3 months. So that's my first tip. If you're doing visuals in Excel and you think you're going to add more data to them every month, put them in a table. Because then what you don't have to do is you don't have to come over here, go select data, and change your data to add the new months. So, right, if I do that, now it's there, but the formatting didn't carry over. This didn't carry over. I got to copy these down. I got to copy my formatting. And I spend an extra 5 minutes. Not that, one off, that's not a big deal. But if you got a bunch of these to do, why spend more time than you need to? So my first tip in Excel, we talked to data viz principles. My first tip, use tables. The next one, has anyone ever used the NA function? Is anyone familiar? This is the function in Excel. Equals NA, open, close parentheses. And all it does is it returns an NA error. Doesn't seem like it would be very useful on the surface. You're like, why would I have a function that just gives me a pound n/a?
We usually try to get rid of them with if error.
Correct. You often see if error, you wrap them. The reality is, when it comes to data visuals, they are one of the most helpful tricks out there. They become very handy, and I'm going to show you why. But yes, Laurent, you're exactly right. In most situations, we want to get rid of them. We don't want to deliberately use them. But I promise you, there is a purpose. So what we're going to do together is in your page, I think this may be blank. I want to show the example real quick. So what I have here, I'm just going to walk you through this together. I have a series of data for 12 periods. In this second column, I want to show just the max. So down at the bottom, I have the formula I'm going to use, and I'm just going to copy it in here. So what I'm going to do is, and I could have put this in a table, but I thought just to show formulas, we'd keep it out of a table. So if the max of this right here equals this, go ahead and give me that number. Otherwise, I'm going to say give me a blank, which is what most of us do. So we're not going to do an NA this first time. and let's see what happens. So we do that, we copy it all the way down, and these two appear, right? Because those two are the max, 1,000. Now, go with me, highlight all this, go to Insert, go Recommended Charts, select the line chart. Notice what happens with the blanks, not zeros, but blanks. There's not, you don't want those to show. Maybe there's not a, maybe there's, even let's say in some cases, maybe there really wasn't data there. You don't want anything. So if you have a blank, they're going to show up like that. Now, let's see what happens, and we'll build it together. You can see it here, but let's build it using NA. So the only difference here, same function, I just put an NA at the end, right? Only difference. So now I'm going to highlight this data. I'm going to insert. I'm going to go ahead and select all charts. We'll do a line chart. And what you'll notice at first is it actually brought in, we don't need that, so I'm going to delete it. It accidentally brought in the period as one of the series. That shouldn't be the series. That should just be on the axis here. So you'll notice there's a series 2. You can't see it right now because it's hidden behind this number here. But if I made it different, if I made that 1,200, it's still not wanting to show up. Let's see. It does this sometimes. So let's just go to the series. So what we'll do is we'll come up here, and we can see here's series 2. So see, you can see right there, it's highlighting that one element. If I made it bigger, so if I did something to make it bigger, like added a marker or something, which I can do. So let's see, let's go built in. I can now see it. So you see right there. So, but all the others don't show up, whereas before they all showed up down here. Right now, you still be thinking, how does that help me? In a minute, I will show how that helps you. So just bear with me. We're going to come, the next example we're going to do, we're going to come back to this one in just a minute, and I'll show you how this works. What I want to show now is you've seen NA. Here are 4 graphs I build using NA. Here's 4 examples of graphs built using the NA function. So here's the first one, and we can walk through this in a minute. I just want to show the example. So what I have here is I have my data. I've created the max and the min. And so now you can see I have different colors for the max and min. So what happens if I add a new month? I'll add 1/1/2026. I'll add $50,000. And notice, because that's my new high, it moved it there. So automatically it's going to always highlight the max and min, and I can add new months. I'm only able to do that because of the NA function. We'll walk through how in a minute. Here's another example. So here, actuals and forecast. These are 2 different series. If you look at the data, you can see there's an actuals line and there's a forecast line, but I've used NA to hide the months of actuals we don't have and hide the months of forecast where I don't want them to show up, and where they connect, I show both numbers. Now I've created what appears to be one line, but I'm able to make each of them look different. So that's another example where NA allows me to build that. Next one here is, and we'll show how we'll show this later, is another example, is in this chart, I have COGS, gross profit, customers, and sales. By clicking a checkbox, I can turn them on and off on my visual. Once again, I am doing that using the NA function. So basically all it's doing is, if this word is false, make these all NA. If not, display the data. So, right, if I hit that checkbox, it becomes true, shows all the data. And I'll show how we do that a little later. Again, same idea, just gross profit is true. So that's, and then the final example of NA that I use is what I call a variance chart. Here, I'm using NA to have this series only show what's greater than 0. So it's showing these right here. Year over year, Toyota grew 4%. Honda grew 8%. Here are the negatives. Again, if these were all 0, they would all appear, or blanks. So I use NA to only display the numbers I want. All right, so back to this example. This is probably, oops, what just happened? I accidentally inserted a new sheet instead of enlarging the size. So I want to show you this one. And we'll go ahead and kind of build this together so you can see it. So say I have my data right here. I want to create labels. What I do when I want to label is I create a new data series, and I only want to show the last number on that data series. So for this one here, for this first data series, I want to show 4157, which I could always just manually type in. Here, I want to show 4573. I could manually type that in. Here, I want to show 2500 right now. And next month, I want to show maybe 2700. So those will allow me to build labels. I'll show why in a minute. So what I could do is I could use a formula. And I will admit, this formula, I had Copilot write it for me. I just told AI what I want. I said what I'm trying to accomplish. So let me show you what it does. So we can copy it here. You can copy it with me. What it's doing is it's saying, hey, do a lookup of 2. It's never going to find 2 because 1 divided by a number could never be greater than 1. So it's going to look at all of them, and it's only going to return the last value because of this 2 here. It's going to say, okay, what is the greatest, what is the last value in this list? And it will return that because it never finds an exact match. So that's what the function's doing. And so what it's going to do is we can copy it here. Same thing. Where it's really helpful is, I have this, and then when I add 2700, it now gives me the last one. And so as I add new months, it will always have something at the end of my line. So what we're going to do now is we're going to insert a line here. So go with me, go to Insert, Charts, All Charts, go to Lines, and select the second one here. And go ahead and insert that. So right now, that doesn't look like what we want. We're going to go ahead and get rid of the legend here. We'll go ahead and get rid of these grid lines for the moment, just to make it easier to read it. And we have this. So I have my 3 lines. But what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to display 2023 for this one, 2024 for this one, 2025 for this one. What I've seen people do is some people will come in, they'll insert a text box, and they'll just manually type the number. Okay, one time, yeah, that works. But let's see how we can automate it now. You'll notice we brought in these 3 data points for a reason. So what we're going to do is in your charts, when you go to Format and you come up here, you're going to see each of these series. You see series 2023, 2024, 2025. Then you see the same series again. So if you click on the second one, you're going to notice it's this one right here. you can see it highlighting that one element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control 1, bring up my side panel, and I'm going to show you a little trick here. So what we're going to do is we have this. We're going to come, hold on, let me do this a little different. I'm going to click here and click on Data Label for this point. And so we want to go to Data Label. We'll go to More Options. And let me scroll over. What you'll notice is it labeled it with 4157. That's not what I want, right? I want to show the year 2023. So what I can do is I can change this to say, give me a value from a cell. And I can select right here in cell F7 2023. So I'm going to add that, hit enter. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away this value. Look at what happened. All right. Oh, oops. Let me fix that real quick. Okay. So when I close this, now what I can do is I have this value from cells and value. When I get rid of value, it should, why did it not show that? Hold on. Something, it didn't quite do what I wanted. Give me 1 second here. All right. Format, 2023. Data label. All right, there we go. More options. Label options. So what we can do is we can add a value from cell. We can reference that value. And
Can you just use the series name?
sorry, what did you say?
Why don't you just use the series name instead of the value?
Because the series name won't show up at the end. That shows up as a label. So what I could do, I know what you're saying. We can try that. Hold on. I get what you're saying. So yes, I usually use value from cell for control, but thank you. Yes, you can use that as well. So in this case, we'll go ahead and do that. I don't know why it wasn't showing value from cell. I usually show value from cell only because it gives me more control, but you can use, just like you said, series name. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'm not sure why it wasn't showing value from cell, but yes. So, right, you just go ahead and do that, and you do that for each of them. So we'll do it as you suggested there. So go to the next one, right? We have 2024. We'll go ahead and label it. Data label. Oops, wrong 2024. We want this one here. More options. And all right, let's see. Why is the label? Oops, hold on 1 second. Data label. There we go. More options. And we will do series name and remove the value like that. And so that's how you could do direct labeling, is I just create a second series and hide everything but the last number. And then we can do it with the next one. And where the benefit comes in is really if you're going to be constantly changing these numbers on this third one, we want the last one here. So we'll go data labels, more options. We'll go ahead and do series name in this case. And right, as soon as I add a new number here, that series name automatically adjusts. And so it will move with the line. All right. The one other example I want to show before we can look at a couple graphs is, love to know how many are using dynamic arrays. Is anyone using dynamic arrays like filter, choose columns? Anyone familiar with those? What I want to show is a few examples of how, all right, I accidentally hit the pencil here. Hold on 1 second. I need to change my, that happened. Sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. Let me reshare. All right. All good. So next, what I want to show is the benefits of using dynamic arrays. So here I've built, and I'll show you how I built this. So what I have is I have just a country list for this example. So we have country sales data for these 25 countries. Then I have a filtered list. Say I only want to look at the top 5 countries. Maybe I want to look at top 3, or maybe I want to look at top 15. So I can look at a list of however many top countries I want, 12, whatever. And this right here automatically updates. And so if you build charts using dynamic arrays, as you'll notice, this list right here changes. Your chart automatically changes as well. Very similar to tables. So I'm a big fan of, when possible, using dynamic formulas to build charts. So I'll show kind of how this one works. So all I did to build this one is there's really 3 steps. First, I created a drop-down list, and I used a sequence function with the number 25 to say, give me a list from 1 to 25. Then here, I went into data validation, and you reference the list. So you can see it's referencing right here. And how you reference it, and I wish this could be, I could enlarge this, but what you're going to enter is this right here. You're going to enter, I'll show you. Let me do that for the moment. You're going to put equals this pound in that box, and that references that dynamic list. Now we can select our drop down here. Next, we'd write our function. So what we want to do is we want to filter this range right here using the large function. So what we'll do is we'll say this entire list, this right here, will tell it how many values to return. So what we've done is we've said, here's my range. Here is what I want. I want you to return the largest 6 or the largest 5. If you close that, and I forgot, let's see, I think, why is that? Did I not do the same range?
I think it expects a single column, the large.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. You're right. Thank you. I copied over. This should be C7. Hold on 1 second. Let me just look real quick what I did wrong. I know exactly what you're talking about. That should. Here. I'm going to do one thing real quick. What did I do wrong? Oh, that's right. I'm supposed to set it equal. I forgot to set it equal to C7. So there we go. It's always fun when you present and can't remember what you did. So what you want to do with the filter, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this down here so I don't do that again. We'll paste it right here. And so what we do with the filter is it's equal filter the entire array. And then here is we want this where it's greater than or equal to the 6th largest value. So it gives us all of them. All right, so now we'll select the entire range. We'll set it equal here. And I got to put, there we go, did that for me. And now that works. So yeah, sorry, I forgot to put the include criteria. I just can't put large. I need to tell it where it should be. So that there will give me the top 12 items. So that's an example of where dynamic arrays become really handy. Let me show two other examples here. And then we'll kind of open it up to questions for a minute. And then I have a few other graph examples, and we can do one or two of them. The next is sales rep. So here, using filter and check boxes, we've built a graph that we can choose who we want to see. And the graph automatically updates. Now, yes, we could just look at the table if we wanted. But generally, right, if I look at this table, it may be hard to kind of see the difference. Sometimes it's a little easier to see it visually than just looking at a table. So all we're doing here is two things. We are first inserting check boxes. So we just come here. Oops, I don't mean two of them. I want just this row. Here, we can turn them on or off, right? So we'll do them all on. And then we just need to add our filter formula. So we're filtering this where this equals true, because check boxes, how they work, and I'll show this real quick, is if I set equal to a checkbox, if you check it, it's true. If you check it off, it's false. So all we've done here is we've done a quick filter, and now we can build a dynamic chart because we're using dynamic arrays. So when we change it, the list changes, the chart automatically changes. If you don't use dynamic arrays, you can use some offset formulas to try to get your chart to automatically update, but it gets challenging without tables or dynamic arrays to have the chart automatically update unless you're using some kind of pivot chart or something, your data. So that's the second example. I'll pause there. Any questions so far? All right. The third example I like here is using a table with dynamic arrays. Welcome, Israel.
Hi.
I just noticed you there.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about the benefits of using dynamic arrays with graphs or charts.
And you just missed very two cool charts.
Okay, so I have to watch again. I have homework.
Indeed.
There you go. All right, so let's look at this third example. What we've done is we've taken some sales data and we've put it in a table. So I have January. Then what I did is I used the group by function. And we'll go ahead and do it together just so you can see it written. I'm going to copy this out real quick just so I can look at it if I need to. Since if anyone's done group by or pivot by functions, they have I think pivot by has 9 arguments. Group by, I think, has 8 or 7. And so they always take me a minute to make sure I get them right because you have so many different options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight hardware cells here. So I want this to say all. So I have that. So I have my data here. And so that's going to be my row fields, my values. All right. Actually, sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight. I did that wrong. Hold on one second. I am actually going to do just this category instead of everything. I want just the product category. Then what we're going to do is we're going to tell it what values we want. For values, I want just a quantity. So I'm going to highlight just the quantity. Then I'm going to tell it what I want it to do. I want it to give me a sum. So I'm going to say sum here. Then it asks, the next question it's asking is, you can barely read it. the field does not header. It's asking about headers. I'm going to say yes and show them. So I'm going to hit 3 to show them. Next, it's going to ask, do I want totals? In this case, I'm going to say no, because I'm putting this in a pivot chart, or I'm putting it into a pie chart. I don't want to show totals. If I showed totals at the bottom and brought that into my pie chart, I would be doubling my numbers. So in this case, I'm going to say 0. Don't show it at all. And I think that's everything I want. The last one I could, oh yeah, I know what the last one is. We'll add that. This is for the order I want to sort it in. So I want to sort it from highest to lowest. So all right, so I've created that pivot table. What I want you to notice is where this is having it in a table with dynamic formulas. What becomes really handy is now let's drop next month in. So I take next month, I drop it down here, and notice all my numbers automatically update. I didn't have to change any of my underlying data because this formula is referencing the entire table, and my pie chart is referencing these dynamic formulas here. Now, I could have used a non-dynamic formula here, but this is really handy because, right, if I did this with the sum ifs, this wouldn't all be one block. I'd have to add the categories. If next month there was a new category, I would have to do it if I wasn't using dynamic functions. It gets kind of messy. And so that's the other benefit. When you understand dynamic arrays, they can be really handy with charts. So just kind of recap. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you guys look. I have some sample graphs at the end, and I have both a practice page and a solution page. And I'm going to let you look at a few, and we'll pick time perspective. We'll probably pick 2, and we'll walk through them together. We may get through 3 depending how long it takes, but we'll build them. So you can just kind of see the different ones of those charts incorporate some of the principles here. Others just show some general principles that we talked about data visualization. So the 3 things we discussed that I think are really helpful in building graphs in Excel. 1, using Excel tables when you're going to be updating the data monthly. You're not using dynamic arrays, so that your data automatically updates versus having to manually do it yourself. So that was the first one. The second is the NA function, which, as Laurent said, most of the time we wrap it in an if error and try to get rid of it, that NA error. Here, we want it on purpose so that we can hide all the values but the one we want to show for labeling and for series, right? We showed how to do a direct label like this using the series name. We showed how we can use the NA function to build something like this. Even this here, where we did some variances, where it's hiding the other values, doing different series. So NA is great for creating series where we need to hide values, because if we show a blank, we end up with something like this, which is not what we want. The blanks show up on our graph. We only want certain points in series. So I'm a big fan of using the NA function. And then the last example we did is just the benefit of using dynamic arrays to build dynamic functions so that, hey, when you make changes, your chart automatically updates. Now, are you going to use that in every situation? No, right? If you're just giving a presentation and it's static numbers, okay, dynamic arrays may not be helpful. But if you're, for whatever reason, building a dashboard in Excel, that could be really helpful where, hey, you can allow somebody to do drop-down selections. You could also do that with pivot tables and pivot charts. There are other ways to do it. But I do really like the flexibility dynamic arrays give. So we walked through a couple examples of those. We showed how we can use them with checkboxes to build graphs where we can just select what we want. You know, say, for example, maybe you're the manager the example I'd use, if I'm the manager of just these 3 people, or maybe we'll say these 5, I want to see just them and how they performed. Now I can. I just select them. So you could send it out to each of the managers and they could look at what they want.
So the filter data is a smart table?
Say that again?
The filter data, the columns F and G. No, F and G. Yes.
So what I did here is I wrote a filter.
So it's a dynamic array function. Okay.
Correct. Yep. So dynamic array with this equal to true.
Okay.
Right. And so that way the graph automatically updates off a dynamic. So really the idea with these 3, all 3 of these are dynamic functions. This one again is a filter with a large. So what we're doing here, what I'm doing on this one, Israel, is I'm basically saying, hey, take this whole data set, anything that's 10, where this is greater than that, give me that list. And so it's giving me a top 10 list. And I have just a drop down here that I used a sequence because I know I have 25 countries. So I can show everything from, right, all 25 if I wanted. I have to move this out of the way because I'm getting a spill. Or I could show just the top 1 if I wanted. I don't know why you would just show 1 in a visual. Probably could have done, 5 through 10 or whatever. But just wanted to show kind of what's possible.
Can you select one of the bars? So
like
it's
that?
not that you don't have the hash on the G8. I thought
no,
on the series, on the bar, you have the hash, but you don't have the hash. But even though it recognized the correct range.
Correct. I don't have a hash here. You don't have to do correct. That's what you can't do hashes on this. It automatically just does the regular range. But if it's dynamic, it recognizes it. I don't know why Excel didn't do. I know what you're talking about, right? If I was to say F8 hash, you would think that would work. It doesn't.
It doesn't. I know that. So that's why I was asking.
Okay, yeah, I figured you did. Yep, exactly. It's thank you for calling that out. And so I wish, frankly, I would prefer it if it worked that way myself, but I'm not Microsoft.
You mean not yet?
Yeah. So those are the examples there, the 3 we did. Now what I have, going back to the principles, if you go to the solution sheets, you're going to see a couple different type of charts. So I'm going to walk through a few of them. And if you guys tell me one you want to build, with some of our remaining time, we'll build 1 or 2 of them. So this first example, I'll just say what they are. This is a pie chart alternative. So this is something I learned from Leela Garani, where you use percentages, dollar amounts, you kind of put in a total, and you build something that I think is easier to read than this. Like if I asked you, okay, what's the percentage for widget? You can see the percentage and you see the dollar value. If I asked you what the percentage is here, you have to hover over it to figure it out. Where here you can pretty quickly say, okay, it's about 17.5, and I can see the value. This to me is easier to interpret. So I'm a fan of this because I think it's easier to read. So that's one example. A second one that I use, this is more of finance. If you don't work in finance, may not see this one as much, but what I like to call a vertical waterfall chart. And it's just some columns here, commentary, you line it up. I can show this as an example. These are some of the most common I use. Next one is a tree map, which I think is really helpful if you have a lot of data, because reading this can be really tough. If someone gives me that, pulling something out of that is hard. It takes time to read that, where reading this is really easy. Going back to those, some of those principles we talk about, I can quickly see, okay, clothing is biggest, youth clothing is biggest. Within toys, it's board games. So we could do a tree map. We could do this one right here, which is what I call actuals with variances. And this is an interesting one. This actually, I use here, I find you get more controls. This is actually a scatter plot. So Again, this is actually a technique I learned from Lee Ladrani. I could show you this one, or there's a couple others in here. Could show you how to build a bubble chart with check boxes. This is one I very rarely build, but sometimes if I have to show 3 different elements, I will use this. This is the only type of 3D I use because I haven't found a better way to show it. So this one here, you can see how it works. So it allows somebody to just look at a certain data set. So there's a bubble chart. There's the one we showed earlier, the max and min chart, where I can show you how we build. This, where it automatically highlights the max and min. So those are some of the examples in here. If there are a couple of you who have a certain chart you really want to see, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'll pick 1 or 2 and we'll walk through how to build them. So if somebody has a preference, let me know.
I like the first one, the one instead of the pie chart.
Okay. We can start
with the percentage, yes, on the percentage on top.
Yep, we'll start there. And I may have to cheat and look at the other one for a second since it's been a little while since I built it, but I think I'll remember everything. All right. So what we have here is we have these different categories, and you'll notice I just sorted them. I ranked them here so I could quickly see that. I don't need the rank to do it, but I did that and I sorted my data in order. I put a total down at the bottom. So there's my data set. You can see what I did, right? You can see the formulas for the percentages. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these two, just the category and the percentage. We'll insert, and we're going to do this right here. So we now have this. And you'll notice it didn't come through in the order I wanted. So what we can do is we can come here and we can hit Control 1. And we can do categories in reverse order. And now it gives them in the order I want. So I have the first part of this. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the grid lines because I don't think we need them here. If you think you need them, you can leave them. Or you can even lighten them. If I do leave them, I generally lighten them because I generally find they're not needed if you add a direct label. So this goes to my principle of, get rid of anything you don't think you need. So I will generally get rid of that. We'll fix the line here in a minute. I'm also going to get rid of my border around it. So I usually go to Format and say No Outline. All right, so I've done that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to want to make these a little thicker. I'm not a big fan of pencil lines. So I'll probably do a gap width of about 70. You may like something different. I typically am somewhere between 50 and 70. Obviously, there's a little bit of visual preference there. So we've done that. Now here, let's highlight this and hit Control 1. We can decide whether we want to show tick marks or not. So I could show, inside like that, which is what I had before. If you look here, you can see I kind of had those lines. So we're getting close. Now we need to add our label, and we can change this color. You can leave blue if you want. I tend to like a gray and only use color, like I mentioned earlier, if I'm trying to make a specific point. So I'm going to go ahead and select a gray. You don't have to. That's preference. Now let's add our labels. So if we click here, we go to Data Label. We'll see, okay, I have the percentage. That's not what I want. What I want to do is I'm going to go Value from Cells, and I'm going to manually add this right here. Okay, so now I have those. I can get rid of values. And I'm going to put them on the inside base. All right, so that's too dark. So I can come up here, make them white, bold them. And I usually make them a little bigger. Again, there's some preference there, right? So now I'm really close. I have my percentages. I give it a better name. For now, we'll just delete the name. I think everybody knows how to enter a chart title. And this looks a little blue. I'm not sure why. I could change those dots. Maybe it's just my monitor at the moment, but that looks more blue than black. So I could go in and play with that color there. But what I want to show now, if we look, there's two things missing, or three. We don't have these three. These are actually manually added. This is probably the hardest, most time-consuming of the graph, is I add 3 text boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little smaller, bring it up a little bit, so I have room to add those at the bottom. So I'm going to insert a text box here, type the word total, figure out whatever size you want it to be. I'm going to go bold. And since it's the total, I'm going to make it just a little bigger than the others, size-wise. Put it right about there. Next, for my line, I just insert a shape here. Put it down at the bottom, somewhere like this, and make it black. One other thing I might do
if you hold shift while drawing the line, it will be straight.
Sorry, what? Shift? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, thank you. All right, so we have our line there. Then the last thing we want to do is insert a text box, but we want to use a formula here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our text box equal to our total, and then we can line it up, make sure it's the same size. So I think we use 14 font there. So let's make sure, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. We'll just click in our box, highlight everything, come up here, make it size 14. And then, I got to make that just a tad bigger. And that's the idea. And if you're going to be moving it around a lot, you can always group all your elements together. So you could highlight all 4 of your elements using Control and the mouse, if I can get it to work. And then you can just come up here once you've highlighted them all, and you can group them together. And then you can move it yourself. But that's the basic idea. So really, the key things are moving this axis to the top and adding custom values for your numbers. Those are the first 2. The third is adding this stuff manually at the bottom. And so I find giving somebody this pie chart alternative is much easier to read, because I get both percentages, I get numbers, I get them all in order. I know what the total is. I can see it in what I think is a cleaner visual presentation. Some people might prefer a pie chart. I say if you have more than 3 to 5 elements, you shouldn't use a pie chart. I generally joke pie is only good for 2 things: eating and playing Pac-Man. So that's kind of my joke. Does anyone have another chart they want me to do? Are any questions on that?
I didn't know that the reverse order will move also the X. That's a nice thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I figured that out. I think it was watching the video. It's not what you would expect.
Yeah. Usually the numbers change, but the X remains the same.
Yeah. So it will, if you do categories in reverse order, it will flip that. Because there's 2 different. If you do it here, but if you do here, if I remember right, because you can do values in reverse order, that will flip the side of them on that axis.
Yes, left to right, right to left.
Categories in reverse order from this axis. So it's counterintuitive. I'm not sure why it works that way, but it works. All right. Does anyone have another one they'd like to see?
I have a general question.
Yes.
do you have some tips? I always get students asking us, how do you know which chart goes with which data? Do you have some like guidelines or tips that we can help our students?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing, if we go back, let me pull it up. The number one tip I have is the first question you have to ask is, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the message you're trying to tell? Because the reality is the message will decide how you're going to look at the data. Like if I want people to understand that, the US, like let's just say the state of California has the most people in the US, I might do something very different than if I want to show the order of every single state. And so the first thing you need to know is, what are you trying to accomplish? That should drive what chart you use, not, oh, I have this type of data, so I have to use this type of chart. I think it's the first general thing to understand. Then from there, I usually kind of ask myself, okay, am I trying to compare something? Am I trying to show a correlation? Am I trying to show parts to whole? Am I showing trends or data over time? And based on kind of which one of these I'm trying to show from my data, that kind of helps me narrow down to what some of the most common can be. A really good book on this is Practical Charts. I love what he does, and I need to think of my version of that, is he does a lot of cheat sheets where he says, hey, if this is what you're trying to do, answer yes, no, and it gets you down to the end and says, okay, this is the type of chart you should use. And he's saying that doesn't apply in every situation. The way I think of it is I usually try to first start with, what am I trying to accomplish? Okay, now that I know, then I try to figure out, okay, what am I trying to do with the data? Compare, show a trend, show a correlation. And then from there, I can say, okay, if I'm trying to show comparisons, which of these type of charts would work best for my data? Now, there's always going to be others, but these are the most common, so I'd start here. Well, if I'm doing correlation, a heat map or a scatter plot might be really good. If I'm doing parts to whole, a tree map or a pie chart probably makes sense. Or that pie chart alternative I showed. So that's the logic I use, is something like that. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Yep. Other questions?
Let's go to the graph with the bubbles.
All right, the bubble one. All right, so what we have here is this one actually brings together a number of principles, almost the most of any of them. And so I think it's a really kind of good learning. So what we do first is, you remember, we want to decide what bubbles we want to show. So the first thing we need to do is we need to decide when we're going to show these three things. So we want a selector right here. Our selector is a simple checkbox. So let's insert a checkbox here. Next thing we're going to do, and I'm going to turn them all on for the moment, and then we'll make sure they're working when we're done. So what I'm going to do is do an if statement. If this equals true, and in fact, we're just going to do this dynamically. We're going to do if G8, we're going to select the entire range to G19 equals true, then give me this. I'm going to go ahead and lock this right here. And this should work unless I'm... And we can see that last one didn't come in. I forgot to tell it what I want it to be. If nothing's there, we're going to use NA. So there we go. So now I can test it. That's all working. And since I did this dynamically, I should be able to drag it over. Although I do it the wrong way. No, I did that. I think I did that, right? Yep, so that one works. All right. And here I'm just going to do the formula so it doesn't mess with my formatting. All right. So now I have the data I need. Next, we're going to go ahead and put in the graph. I'm going to ignore the country manager. I don't want to bring that in. That was more information in this example to say, oh, if I wanted to select just the countries for Jane, I'd click these. So we're going to select these three things for our actual graph. We've set up our data. So now we're going to go to Insert, Recommended Charts, Scatter Plot, and then you go to the last one here and you select that one right there. Only time, this is the only 3D I'll ever use in charts. As a general rule, I hate 3D charts. But I haven't found a good way to show three different elements. We're showing revenue, EBITDA, and headcount, and it's relatively easy to read. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix our axis because we shouldn't have a negative headcount, or sorry, a negative revenue. So I'm going to hit Control-1 here, and I'm going to change the minimum to 0, and I'm going to change the maximum. Maybe we'll leave it at 1800. That's probably fine. I might change it to 17 for this one. That's a little bit of a judgment call. So we fixed that one. This one here goes all the way up to 80. Our high is 65. So we could bring that down a little bit. We could bring it down to 70 if we wanted, or we could leave it. I'll go ahead and change it to 70. Not a big deal there. All right. So now we've done that. Next, I'm going to get rid of my grid lines here. Okay, so we've done that. I can put a nice title here. Anyone who knows me knows I always get rid of my outline. I just don't like them. But again, a little bit of a preference there. Now the big thing we need to do is how do we change the colors and bring in the names? So first, let's see, I'm trying to remember. No, where is it? Give me 1 second. I thought it was right here. Oh, no, I think it's actually on the, here. Yes, there we go. No, not values. Give me 1 second. Why can't I remember? It always takes me a minute to find my color. Let me look at this one. Give me 1 second here. There's a is it on this one? It's on one of these where it allows you to show, is it data labels? No. I may ask AI here. I'm going to cheat for a second because I thought I could find it. What?
Go for it.
So what we'll do is we'll just come to Claude and ask it where it's at because it's slipping my mind at the moment. Where do I change the colors of a bubble chart? So this is the real example, right? If you can't remember, I don't build these often enough. So it says on the format data series, change colors to, okay, no, I want each to automatic. That's not what I wanted. Why? Oh, there it is. Yeah, vary colors by point. That's what I want. Okay, so click the paint bucket icon. All right, so paint bucket icon and there. That I forgot to expand fill. I was looking for it here. When you click vary colors by point, it assigns a different color to each of them. So now I can distinguish them all. I just need to fix my data labels. All right, so if we come in here, we go to more options. What's nice is you'll notice by default, it shows the Y value, it shows the leader lines, all these different things. What I want is, let me undo that. I'm going to go back, and I always want to show one, so you don't want to get rid of all of them. Bubble size is not being displayed. So right now we're showing revenue and we're showing EBITDA. So we're going to make the number that shows here head count, bubble size. But what I also want is I want the country. So I'm going to do the, not the series name. Let's see. No, I want value from cells. And we'll add the country names here. And then what I typically do is I will show a new line and do something like that. Usually I like to put them above. We can decide whether we want, you can add a leader line if you want it here. And I usually bold them, and I might need to adjust a few of them a little bit. Odds are we're not going to show every country at once. But now I have something that I think does a pretty good job of showing 3 different elements: revenue, EBITDA, and headcount. And as a general rule, I don't know that I would recommend showing all 3, but if you have to, that's where I find a bubble chart helpful. And now, right, if I click off on some of these, like if I just want to look at just Jane, I can click off on all the others. And I can see Jane's performance. So I can look at it and be like, okay, Germany has the best EBITDA, the highest revenue. They also have the most headcount. And I could ask questions from there. But it gives a pretty good, just kind of high-level visual where you could start asking questions about countries. All right, so I know we just have a couple minutes left. I got to leave at top of the hour. So any questions from anyone in the last couple minutes we have?
Yeah, I have a question regarding a chart called the Sankey, which you could use in Excel by installing add-ins. But is there a way to create a chart that would show the flow of funds from a few sources to a few buckets and then to a few targets without installing an add-ins? Again, flow of funds from some sources to some buckets to some destinations.
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. If you send me an example, I can play with it a little bit, but I can't think of something right away without an add-in.
Okay.
But if you send me an example, I'll play with it a little bit because
will do.
That does sound interesting.
I had to use Python for that, but Excel is much more easier, and it's on any desktop. So Python was just like a one-timer.
I get it. And probably what I'll do is, if you send me an example of what you want to look at in the data, I may also play a little bit with AI and see if it gives me some ideas, see what I can come up with.
Sure thing.
Off the top of my head, it's not coming to mind.
Cheers.
Any other questions? I could take one more question, 1 or 2 more questions.
Is the NA function is the only function that won't appear on the graph, or any other error function will do the same job?
I've always only seen people use the NA function. You could try another error function. I will admit, I haven't tried the others. I've just always stuck with NA because I know it works. I'm the kind that once I find what works, I just stick with it.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
And it's a really easy function for me to remember.
And it's also a very short function, just 2 letters.
Exactly. So I don't think so. I mean, we could try real quick. Let's take a look.
Let's do a division by 0 and see if it affects the graph.
So if I take, it shows up. Yeah. You can see right there. So I think all of them are I'm gonna guess they'll all show up, but not positive. Anything else? We got 1 more minute.
Merav, question. No questions.
All right. Well, if there's no questions, thank you for inviting me, Israel. I hope everybody got benefit out of that. You have the files, so you can, kind of pick some of them apart and try to figure out how they work. On my YouTube channel, I think I walked through a few of these. And, I know on a couple of them where I got the idea from someone else, I tried to reference their YouTube video. So you could go watch it if you wanted. But the reality is you can do amazing things with Excel and charts. It's just a matter of experimenting and learning. And a few tips go a long way. Yes, I'll send what I'll do is, Israel, I'll go ahead and send you the master file that I have.
Okay.
In addition to the practice file, just so you have it for your records.
So Merav, you have to ask very nicely.
We'll
Yep.
also appreciate if you could send us the PDF that you told us before.
Yep, I will send both. I'll send a PDF of the PowerPoint, and I'll add in those couple different type of charts that weren't in there originally, kind of my key sheet for that, and I'll send you the master file.
Thank you very, very much. Highly appreciate
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I learned a
Thank
few
you.
things
Appreciate
about
it.
the
Thank you very
NA. I
much.
didn't know about the NA.
Cheers.
Me too.
So
So
cheers.
thank
Thanks,
you all, and
everybody.
see you next month.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.